at my dad's service station when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. And I think what I learnt at my dad's service station on the corner of Pascoe Road and Buckley Street, Moonee Ponds, down in Victoria there, those core principles in business and philanthropy and giving back to the community, I've tried to instill in every other business or every other opportunity I've had. My passions now are certainly working with entrepreneurs such as yourself. Listen in, but we'll also, if you want to know a little bit more about Craig Schultz, feel free to log on to craigschultz.com, but also at the same time feel free to listen to the podcast once it's been refined and edited, and I sound even better than I do now. But we're going to get started, so I'll hand it over to Craig Schultz, my good friend, all the way from Ascot Vale.
Okay.
A Moonee Valley boy, which is good.
I know, and we've got a lot of common friends as well.
We do.
Looking forward to doing this podcast with you, and as I always say to people, you've got one shot at life, go out there and give it your best shot. But the One Shot Movement podcast is a podcast about inspiration, education, diving deep into the stories of entrepreneurs that are making it happen. And I guess for you, you are the epitome of an entrepreneur that's made it happen, because you're an incredible real estate, or had an incredible career in the real estate industry. You then moved on and won the Apprentice, which is an amazing show and highly popular show, and then went on with Mark Bouris as the winner and took that business to what it is today, and now back involved in another company that you were involved with, the Entourage.
Yes.
But you're also quite passionate about charity, and I know you're a lot heavily involved in charity and doing some amazing things in general. So let's just rewind a little bit and unpackage your story.
There's a lot to rewind to.
So where did it all start? Like, I know that you're, I guess, pre your career, you're an entrepreneur in Moonee Ponds with nightclubs or discos or whatever it is, and just start there.
Well, so for those of you that are listening, thank you for listening and taking the time out of your day or your night to listen to this podcast. Craig, thanks very much for having me. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Andrew Morello. I'm the winner of the first Australian Apprentice and also the head of business development at the Entourage with Jack Delosa, and I was one of the founding members with Jack and one of the first investors in the business as well. I did start my career in the back streets of Moonee Ponds, as you know, at my dad's service station when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and I think what I learnt at my dad's service station on the corner of Pascoe Road and Buckley Street, Moonee Ponds, down in Victoria there, those core principles in business and philanthropy and giving back to the community, I've tried to instill in every other business or every other opportunity I've had. My passions now are certainly working with entrepreneurs such as yourself and having a partner / shareholding in the Entourage and working very closely with Jack to build out our Entourage movement. But also, as you mentioned, my philanthropy work, which I did the Kokoda Trail last year to raise money for Indigenous education. Sit on the board for Seed Foundation and also sit on the board for Project Gen Z, where we do work over in Cambodia running entrepreneurial programs for kids that come out of the Sunrise Village Orphanage program. So, yeah.
I guess, what you're doing is amazing, it's inspiring, and you were an original member of the Entourage. We're going to talk about that in this podcast episode, but go back to real estate and some of the lessons we were recently in Fiji, and you're talking about the things that you were doing as a 19-year-old that most 19-year-olds wouldn't even think about doing, but the things that you were doing back then and how that set up your future and your opportunities and business as well.
Yeah, I was very lucky to start my career at a place called Compton and Green Real Estate in Williamstown when I was 18, under the beautiful guidance of one of my still mentors, Adrian Butero, who did the Kokoda Trail with me. And interestingly enough, Jack Ma, who was the founder of Alibaba, for those who are listening and may not know his story, he talks about being when between 20 and 30 years old, it's not necessarily the company you work for, how much money you make, but rather surrounding yourself and working alongside somebody who's really going to change your life. And Adrian Butera allowed me to not only be innovative in the real estate industry, but also at the same time provide me the good base and good mentorship to become a great auctioneer and an award-winning auctioneer, but also as well a great salesperson. And there's probably those core principles that he really fed into the way that I was going to live my life when it came to business. Was obviously they sound simple, but the funny part is a lot of people don't do them. But the integrity and the honesty, often when you're in the real estate business or in business in general, there's plenty of opportunities to do the wrong thing, and there's a lot of people that take that option. But Adrian always taught me just always going with that honesty and integrity. And you might not win the business 100% of the time, but at least you can go to bed at night and you can sleep. And often if you've lost the business, a lot of people will come back to you at a later point as well. Probably the other core couple of principles I had as well was always give people and what is now become synonymous with a lot of what I did with the nightclub and events business, what I did with real estate, and now what I've done with financial services, property and entrepreneurialism is providing that world-class Morello experience. So always trying to find a way to just go above and beyond to give people that world-class experience.
Yeah, and look, I mean, 100% what you're doing. I know you quite well, and we've got common friends.
We do.
And I always say to you that the two best networkers that I know is yourself and Matthew Pilios. He's also been a guest on this show, but ironically...
Matty, if you're watching, mate, you're always bloody going to mention mate. There we go.
But, in all seriousness, you guys also grew up together.
We did. There must have been something in the water in Moody Bonds.
That's quite amazing. But you were thriving in real estate. You were really hitting your straps, and you sort of got to an opportunity that I don't know if it came out of nothing, but the opportunity to go on to a new show in Australia, the Apprentice, which you ended up winning.
Yes.
I'd love to hear a bit about
how it happened.
How it happened, getting on the show, and actually the experience on the show. Because I remember watching the show, and I used to nearly put myself into your shoes all the time and actually go, how would I deal with this situation?
Yeah. The irony is, and he should probably get a mention as well, he's actually just joined our family business, which is Jealous Craig Real Estate down in Melbourne. That's Maddie's competitor, if Maddie's listening, Marshall White. But Spiro Vassiliadis actually, did part of the nomination for me and sent me his nomination, sent me the forms and everything. And he's like, should try out this Apprentice. And there's a lesson in this. It's a sliding door moment, obviously, Chelsea, that the reality is that if, when Spiro sent it to me, I reckon I'd love to find that email somewhere, because I reckon I've got that email still somewhere, where I wrote back to him, mate, I don't have time for this rubbish. I was $1 million writer in real estate in gross commission, so I was doing, 72 transactions, 72 listings, 115 transactions a year, so I was busy.
And at age
22, 23, wow. Yeah. So I was busy, and I said to Spiro, I don't have time for this rubbish, and he's like, nah, mate, there's this one with Donald Trump. I know you like Donald. Back then I liked Donald Trump, but he's like, I know you like Donald Trump, and I'd read Donald Trump's books, and obviously he'd had done well in property, and that was something I was very passionate about. And Spiro goes, no, you got to try out for this thing. And I wasn't going to go. And even the morning of my audition, effectively, that was at the Rendezvous Hotel in Flinders Street in Melbourne, I'd gotten called to like a $1.8 million listing in Essendon, in Willie Street, Essendon. And I thought, down in Victoria, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just going to not rock up. And I don't know specifically what it was, but I went. It was a 6-stage process. They had, I think, roughly about 10,000 people try out. I made sort of the top 100 in Victoria, then the top 100 in Australia. And before you knew it, I was on the top 12 for the show. And then off the back of that, people always ask me, I do a lot of speaking, as you know, in the corporate industry now. So corporate speaking, I'm speaking for Sunchuro in a couple of weeks. I just spoke for a couple of the big 4 banks. I'm speaking, for the entourage over the next couple of days. And they always say to me, how did you beat everyone? Like that's the world that we live in. We think it's about how did you beat everyone. The reality was that I didn't go in to beat anybody else. I went in to beat myself. And I went in to be the best possible Morello possible, and if people liked it, they did. If they didn't, then so be it. And a lot of people went reality TV. I know some people that are on it's a different kind of reality TV that are on maths right now, and they're going through a few dramas. And I warned these particular friends of mine, female friends of mine, that reality TV is a harsh world. Like, they got to make good television, right? So, but my theory was, when people warned me of that, was that if Morello just stayed himself all the time and was his true and authentic self, then nobody could ever call me out on it. The reality is, I was always just honest with who I was. And the thing is, when you film for 10 weeks straight, 24 hours a day, and you're living in a house with 12 other strangers plus a production crew in 14 Bunya Parade in South Coogee, this beautiful mansion that John Singleton owned, that's where they filmed it. You can only bullshit for so long. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but I just did. So you can only bullshit for so long that if you pretend to be someone you're not, and it's a lesson in life, isn't it? If you pretend to be someone you're not, eventually at some point somebody's going to work it out. And Mark Bouris isn't the kind of guy that you bullshit pretty quickly. He's pretty onto it pretty quickly. And Mark and I hit it off immediately. And he told my parents that he'd picked me after sort of week 1, week 2, and he told me that he'd picked me sort of after week 3, week 4, I think, just so he didn't give me too much of a big head. But he's been a great mentor, a great role model, and a second father.
And while we're just on that show, before we move on, like an environment like that and those boardroom sessions at the end is just beyond pressure, and it's like dog eat dog in a way.
They go for about 16 hours. People don't realise on the show they go for about 4 or 5 minutes.
Right.
But what they do is they get you up at 4 or 5 in the morning, get you to the studio. So those are done. It looks like in the Yellow Brick Road boardrooms, but they're modelled. The boardrooms modelled off the Yellow Brick Road boardroom. It's in a studio at Fox Studios, and they fill you full of sugar. The producer's job is to tell Mark stuff to try and get someone to lose their shit. They put you in, separate you, so you're in different rooms, so you can't collude and get your story straight. And then they just bring you back in the room and they mic you up and they go hard at it. So those are probably, if someone said to me what was the hardest part of it would have been the boardroom sessions. But once again, I always backed the decision I made. I was project manager, so the leader of the winning team, or the leader of the team 4 times, and all 4 times we won. No, 3 times we won. I lost 1 time. No, 4 times I was project manager and won. 1 time we lost and I was not project manager and I got called in. Right. That was... It was a stressful, but at the same time, enlightening experience. Putting yourself in that scenario really forces you to look at yourself and to be true to your core values of honesty, integrity, and hard work, and believe in who you are and what you're trying to achieve. And it worked out.
And on that note, like Mark Bouris, for the international guests, is probably one of Australia's biggest entrepreneurs and business leaders. You ended up landing a job with him. Yes. And just talk through that experience, because you effectively launched a new business, Yellow Brick Road, at the time, and become this incredible success story. Yeah, we grew it to 135 offices. We listed it on the stock exchange. Mark's an amazing business leader like that. It's become in recent years much more difficult for those who, I know you do have quite an international following, so for those who are from overseas, Australia went through a thing called the Banking Royal Commission, which definitely affected the second and third tier market, which we play a lot in the Yellow Brick Road space. But Mark didn't give me a chance to be sort of effectively a seed investor in the company. So I was rewarded not only financially, but also with the learnings that Mark gave us. Like, it was just being around someone of that caliber, early 60s, was business partners with Kerry Packard, which was probably Australia's first billionaire, if I look at history correctly. He was 50-50 partners with him in a previous business called Wizard Home Loans. So, I got a chance, and I'm sure in 20 years' time, people will talk about Mark like they talk about Kerry Packard. They already do, a lot of people, but, I'm sure in 20 years' time, that will become the norm. And I'll be able to say that I did, 10 years by his side. Still very good friends, still very good, much my mentor, still consultant
Salt still back to Yellowbrick Road, but wanted to really ramp up my entrepreneurial activities with the Entourage and Jack Delosa, who's another amazing businessman.
Yeah, and while we talk about that, the Entourage, you were one of the original Entourage people. Then you took effectively a 10-year gap out, if we're talking about that, but now you've come back involved. Do you want to talk about original vision with the Entourage and Jack?
Yep.
And why you come back?
Yeah, so the Entourage, for those of you who have followed the Entourage journey, but also followed the, Jack's story, the Entourage started, ironically, at 291 Racecourse Road in Kensington in Melbourne. So we used to run a Melbourne group, and we used to run a Sydney group that was running the boardroom at the Yellowbrick Road offices. So going back 10 years ago, on April 1st, 10 years ago. So it was a long time. And, I saw a lot of qualities in Jack Delosa. We were introduced by a mutual friend from Essendon down in Melbourne. Both Jack and I are originally from Melbourne. We both just moved to Sydney, and we were introduced by a mutual friend that felt that Jack and I were very, very similar, but also very, very complementary. And to this day, I still see that. We went out for Jack's birthday last week in Sydney, and we obviously had a couple of beautiful French wines, and by the end of it, we're telling stories about the old days and getting very nostalgic. And Jack really has this amazing ability to really focus, and he has this amazing ability to really obsess over the detail and the beauty of what is the Entourage. And I feel that my contribution and that complementary skill set is that I try and be as much of the romance and the heart of the Entourage. And I think that blend between the two of us has just worked really, really well. And I'm sure if you ask Jack, he'll say the same.
Yeah, and like you started off as just really a vision, and now today the Entourage is, explain where the Entourage is today, because this is
our office
that we have.
Yes, this is our beautiful office. I apologise the view for those who were watching on the Facebook Lives and those who were watching on the recorded. Those who are listening, we are in the Rabobank building on level 5 overlooking the beautiful Circular Quay.
Darling
Harbour. There we go. I'm from Melbourne, guys. Don't blame me. It was just a vision. We didn't think it would ever be as big as it is today, and now we've probably got members throughout We've got a on-demand program, an Accelerate program, and an Elevate program, which Craig's a part of, and we've also got now an on-demand advisory part of the business too, which I'm overseeing. And between all that, we've got about 1,000 active members. We've had about 400,000+ people attend an event, be a past member, attend a webinar, come to a workshop. So over the last 10 years, we've literally touched about 400,000 people, and we've now got members including our online members and our face-to-face members and clients. We're touching about 11 countries now. So you'll see some exciting things. Schultzy, you'll be front row for it. So some exciting things over the next 12 to 24 months where Jack and I will look to expand the business internationally, now that we're getting such quite a following there, and it might fit in well, especially with your following too. So we're very, very excited to sort of maximise and leverage that exposure, but at the same time, we want to do it correctly, and we want to make sure that we're providing a world-class experience every single time, whether that's somebody logging onto a $99 online webinar, or whether that's someone that's obviously in our premium model, which yourself are in, and getting the full experience, including our retreats and our sort of advisory service and things of that nature.
And like you are, I guess, are really important about business development and helping people grow in the business as well. And I would call you clearly a master networker. But what are some of the other business skills that you would say has held you in good stead? You're a great presenter on stage, you're good at sales. Like, what would you say for someone that's trying to grow their business are essential skills to learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. No, I don't even feel like anyone's really even asked me that, because I think they see me such as the sales guy or the networker, but I think empathy is a great thing, like an important part. Like, if people said to me, what are some of probably the core principles that have gotten me to where I am, is one, having empathy not only for our clientele, and we do that every day with the Entourage members, and we did with I did with the Yellow Brick Road franchisees and Yellow Brick Road customers in the finance world, in the property world. But having empathy for the people that work within your business, we do an internal happiness score, which is all confidential and anonymous within our team, and we sort of score always 85-90% plus for people being happy working here at the Entourage. But having that empathy and that people management is massively important. The second thing probably is the resilience. You've been around long enough to know that we did go through some tough times. We got advised by multiple legal counsel that we should have just wrapped up shop and limited our liabilities. But Jack and myself and some of the other key investors and key people went, no, we're gonna work through this. We made some changes in the business where we went into the RTO space, the Registered Training Organisation space, and we tried to leverage off governmental funding. And then the good news and bad news, by the time we did it, we actually realised they pulled the funding, which cost us millions of dollars, but it was actually a good thing that it took us so long to get done, because we hadn't predicated the whole success of our business based on government funding, which was a good thing. So we went back to our original model, which was non-government funded, non-accredited education, which has just boomed for us again, and probably where not being arrogant or hubris, the best in Australia, probably one of the best in Australasia, and one of the best in the world now in that delivery of that. But the resilience was a massive thing. So that empathy, that resilience, and probably the last one that I always talk to people about is having the ability to really understand what it is that is your product to market fit. That's something I've always been very good at, understanding what people actually need. And once you understand what people need, you don't necessarily need to be Andrew Morello or Peter Lakovich or Jack Delosa to be a good salesman or salesperson. You need to just be very good at listening. And I know it's odd and ironic because I do a lot of talking, but it's amazing. I might do a lot of talking, but the listening I do is active listening, and I absorb a lot of people's stories. I absorb a lot of what's important to them. I understand what it is that's going to be a forward motivator for them, and I don't abuse it, but I do identify it, and then I try and help them identify how we're going to help them go to the next level to reach their full potential and not waste their precious life.
And I know, and I've had a lot of people in property on this episode or on this series, because we've had brokers, we've had buying partners of real estate agents. You're a property guy. What
Yes.
would you say to people that are looking at building wealth and property, and if someone has fear around having debt
Yes.
on property, what would you say about property as a wealth creation strategy?
Yeah, great question. It's something I'm very passionate about. I think if you still type in on Google Morello Matrix, you will get the Yellow Brick Road still use it as a bit of a lead magnet. They will send you out my my ebook that I wrote while I was still full time at Yellow Brick Road. So feel free to download that, guys, and that covers people from first home buyers to first-time property investors to multi-property landlords. I am a multi-property landlord. I own a number of properties, and I'm a customer and a client of our family business. I pay fees to my brother's business to manage that for me. Property has put my family in good stead. I'll tell you now, my father or my family have never helped me acquire any of the properties that I've acquired. My father is a Sicilian man, came off the boat in 1956 from Italy with one shoe and an empty suitcase, and he has this old school mentality that you need to do it on your own, which is fine. Obviously as a young boy I resented him slightly for it, but now I'm very grateful for it. And probably the biggest thing around property is that more is lost with indecision than wrong decision. So like I say to people, if you've got it, a lot of people go to me, I was waiting for this particular property or particular area, or should I buy where I want to live, or should I buy an investment property? I just buy. Just buy, and I am a big believer, buy the home that you live in initially. There's a gentleman who I'm good friends with, Chris Gray, who talks about, renting the one you live in and then buying investment properties. It's because he likes to live in $20 million houses, and you can rent those for a lot less than you can pay interest on. So if your interest repayment's $500,000 a year, you can rent one of those, 10, 15, $20 million houses in Vaucluse or in Potts Point for, a couple of $100,000. Someone who owns a caliber home like that and is renting it owns it outright. I can assure you that they're not looking for yield. But yeah, family's been in property since 1956. I bought my first property at 18 in Moonee Ponds, and I just bought another one last year. So so I continue to grow the portfolio. I've got effectively 8 properties now, and they're all in key areas that are continuing to grow in capital growth. I'm not a yield buyer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a yield strategy, but my recommendation to people is just immerse yourself in education, understand what's the difference between capital growth and yield, and I think once you can understand that a little bit better, then you can make a better decision. But make a decision. Don't wait another 24 months and think, interest rates are going to get lower or the property prices are going to drop. I think, the reality is if you'd bought 2 years ago, you would have already made money already. So, yeah.
Yeah, and like a lot of people are scared to take the plunge just through straight out the fear of debt.
Yes, sorry, I didn't address that. Yeah. So I was very, very lucky, Schultzy, that my father taught me at a very young age to be comfortable with debt. When our father was having a good day, a good month in the service station, he had BPs and Caltexes and Amicos, for anyone old enough to remember Amicos, we knew when our family was having a good month and a bad month. And I think, look, I got 6 goddaughters and a godson, and I've been around children my whole life. I've got 2 nieces as well. I'm not a father specifically myself just yet, but I do mentor a lot of kids, and I'm in the youth. I do work in the youth space. The biggest thing I can recommend to parents is don't coddle them. Don't hide them from the truth when the family is having a good month or a bad month. Like, don't just let them see the trips overseas or the trips to Queensland, to Movie World, and think everything's all fine and dandy. My father, we worked in the family business from a young age. We knew when things were good. You knew when things weren't good because it was quiet in the workshop and on the driveway. And our father taught us at a very young age the power of a thing called leverage, and understanding that yes, you got to put yourself through a bit of drama and stress to pay these mortgages off, but if you do that now in the short term, it should pay dividends in the long term. And the reality is, I'm not worth squillions to a point where I could go and buy myself a $20 million yacht, but at 33 years old, I could very easily sell down my portfolio now and my business interests in my shares in my different companies and live a comfortable life for the next 70 or 80 years. I could. So the reality, by investing it correctly, selling it down and putting into an investment portfolio, some sort, I could do that. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean me driving around in not that I'd ever do that. You know that I don't even own a car. But, it's not living an expensive or driving expensive cars or anything, but that would be a comfortable life for the rest of my life. And I can attribute that by making those decisions to buy into property at 18 years old.
Yeah. And I guess we've been talking about some areas that you've been actively involved in. Do you want to just share with us a bit about your passion for charity? And you're doing a lot of auctions, and you're really connecting to a lot of different organisations and just giving back. Why do you do that? And just share a bit about that.
Well, the irony is, in the video, I know people listening to this on the podcast as well, but in the video that we're filming, just behind us is the ICC. I'll actually be doing the Arnott's Foundation Ball this Friday night with Camp Quality. So Arnott's is the number one donor to Camp Quality for kids with cancer and running camps for their families. And I'll be doing that Friday night with Katrina Roundtree from Getaway. They'll have some other celebrities there. So Neil Perry, the chef, will be there. Moran from ARIA will be there as well, and I get an opportunity to co-host and present and call the charity auction for a number of different events. The two that I'm in particular very, very passionate about, obviously, is the work I do with Geraldine Cox, Order of Australia medal winner over in Cambodia. I go there every year. If anyone wants to check that out, it's at Project Gen Z on Instagram. If you want to check that out, my Instagram's at Andrew Morello. You can follow me and see the different philanthropic works that I get involved with there. And then the other thing I became very passionate about is working with the Indigenous community of Australia, trying to give back to those remote communities, and we're doing that in the health education space. So they're probably and we've raised $2.5 million plus in that work, and it's something I'm very, very passionate about making sure we can continue to do.
Yeah, and it's easy to not go into that space, but what was the real drivers for you to go into really giving back like you do?
Yeah, look, I did a lot of work around my spiritualism, as you know personally, but for those of you who don't know me that well, I've done a lot of work in the spiritual growth space, and in the spiritual growth space, I've done work with Deepak Chopra. I've done Unleash the Power Within with Tony Robbins. I've done Date with Destiny. I've probably spent $500,000 on personal and self-development over the last, we're talking the last 15 years, if not probably some more actually in 15 years now. I think about it, considering all the business coaches I've had, and I see a high performance psychologist and things of that nature that works with NRL and AFL footballers and so forth. And the reality is that for me, one of the biggest spiritual learnings I got was that the law of reciprocation, and the fact that I was very, very blessed. Both my mum and dad had difficult childhoods. I didn't have a difficult childhood, which we spoke about at lunch. I didn't have a difficult childhood, but I've really come from a family where my father was, you need to be the captain of your own fate, the master of your own destiny, and that law of reciprocation and giving back to the world was something that was really, really important to me. Something that I started when I was 15 years old. I was the vice captain of St Bernard's in Essendon down in Melbourne. My brother was school captain. My sister was school captain in Ave Maria. And what I realised is they got us doing work with St Vincent's de Paul. And whether you're religious or not, you can do it from a non-denominational point of view. I do work with Jewish Care Australia, which is a Jewish charity that supports non-Jewish people within the Sydney suburbs. And I'm not Jewish. I just got involved in it because I believed in what they were doing. And I think it basically just grew and grew and grew. And then it got to the point where I realised I was really good at it. Like I've made jokes before about packing up shop in the business world and going to live with Geraldine, who's in her 70s now, in the orphanage in Kandal in Cambodia, in just an hour out of Phnom Penh. And she would love for me to do that. We have a very close relationship. You'll see through my social media that I catch up with her monthly or bi-monthly whenever she's in Australia, and she and I catch up with her a couple of times a year in Cambodia. She would love that, but she said, Morello, your number one asset is the capability you have of asking someone to donate $20,000, and they will, because you've helped so many people make so much money that they're like, okay, you know what? Great, yeah, 20 grand, no worries, let's do that. And I think that's where I see it. I've got an amazing ability to get people to part with their money for great causes. It's my contribution. I part with a lot of my own money for those causes as well, but I don't do it for any recognition. I do it because I believe in those, in the people that we're willing to help.
Mm. And just at the end of every podcast, I always ask some rapid fire questions.
Great.
So, if you're a book reader or a podcast listener to, what would you say a book that an audience could get massive value out of, or something that you absolutely love?
So I'm a book and documentary guy. So I know I'm on a podcast now, mate, so I've listened to your podcast, but I'm a book and documentary guy. So a couple of books worth reading, a couple of documentaries worth watching. Books, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, an amazing book, definitely worth reading. You don't have to be born brilliant by John McGrath, who's one of my close mentors alongside Jerry Harvey and Mark Bouris and so forth. So you don't have to be born brilliant by John McGrath. The Seven Spiritual Laws by Deepak Chopra, another amazing book and an easy read. If you're into something a little bit deeper It took me 2 or 3 reads to get it really absorbed, but The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle is a classic and a good one. Obviously, you should read Jack's books as well, and also Mark Bouris' books. There's a lot of benefit in reading those. And then when it comes to documentaries, I try and balance myself out between history, business, philanthropy, and also and spirituality. And a really, really good documentary is that's worth watching. That's out right now on Netflix. Is Inside Bill's Brain. It's a really good balance between philanthropy, world vision, and business. It's about Bill Gates. It's a 3-part series where he delves into the detail of what his vision is for a better world, and the money that himself and Warren Buffett and his wife and then their respective wives and partners have donated to trying to change real things that can actually have lasting change, not just giving a fish out, but rather teaching people how to fish and providing a better life for them. There's a great online program called School of Life, which is on YouTube, which people should subscribe to. There's sort of 7 to 12 minute clips that I listen to in the morning. Often I've got to catch a 5:30 flight or 6 o'clock flight somewhere, so about 100 plus flights a year, so I'll put it on at 4 o'clock in the morning while I'm getting ready and just listen and so forth. And what happens is often that gives me an opportunity to learn. So it's called School of Life, and it's all different categories, all different ideas, and the meaning to life is the people we meet and what we create with them. But importantly, having that knowledge gets me to know a lot about a little and a little about a lot. And off the back of that, it's given me the chance to be able to actually educate other people and become more enlightened.
All right, and two lasting questions. One was, what's the best bit of advice? It could be from your dad, it could be from your first mentor, it could be from Mark Bouris. What's the best bit of advice and worst bit of advice? Yeah,
so Mark Bouris, a great piece of advice he gave me was play to your strengths and work on your weaknesses. He used to get me to do legal documents that would take me 4 hours, but often what would happen was I was terrible at legal work, but Mark would get me to do it to learn. So that was a great learning. And the worst piece of advice, look, I'm pretty careful on who I take advice from, but I think it's when you're young, and I think when you're young, people often just be careful if you are young or you are impressionable, taking advice from people that haven't got the experience. So it's not necessarily bad advice, but probably people are very quick to give you opinions, but unless they've gone through the experience, just be vigilant of the advice they give you.
And the last question is, you've inspired people all around the world, and I've heard you speak on stage a number of times, and I always get a lot of energy out of what you often talk about. If you're someone that's looking to get ahead in life, like they're taking their one shot, what would you say to inspire them? Give them a piece of wisdom that might be the difference between them sitting in camp and taking the plunge.
Yeah, definitely. I go back to, again, read the property model, which is more is lost with indecision than wrong decision. But everybody should try their their absolute best to reach their full potential and not waste their precious life. And the only way you can do that is by truly stepping outside your comfort zone to reach your full potential.
Wow, that's very good advice. And look, this podcast is all about inspiring people, educating people, and diving deep into stories. And you've been through an amazing journey to date. Right, you've hit TV show, mainstream TV. You've helped one of Australia's leading entrepreneurs build a business. You're doing it again with a second incredible entrepreneur, Jack Delosa. Real estate. You've had not what I would call a colourful career, but just a really, I guess really going out of the way and following your advice that you just gave there. So I want to thank Andrew Morello for jumping on the podcast, and hope you enjoy this week's episode.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Craig. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
You've got one shot, so take it. You live one life, embrace it. Don't let fear tie you down, it'll mess you around. You've got one shot.